Welcome to an episode of Remember, the series where I take a look back at something, remind you what the most common feelings about it were, and then break it down into 10 criteria to see if it actually deserved that reputation or not. Today we're back on Battlefield 1, as I'm sure you can tell, and this is the SMG 0818, which I know already has some of your blood boiling out there if you played Battlefield 1 after this gun was completely transformed by the developers. Be sure to let me know in the comments what you think about this gun, good or bad. These videos thrive off hearing all of the different opinions out there. But yes, the common feeling about this weapon from the average player base was that it was straight up 100% overpowered. But is that true? Well, here are the 10 criteria we'll be looking at to help us to decide. History, basics, usage, strengths, weaknesses, counters, playstyle, meta, legacy, and conclusion. The timestamps for these will also be in the description. And I am still on the hunt for 50k subscribers, currently at 48k right now. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more, if you're new here or if you just like to help out, hitting that subscribe button will be absolutely massively appreciated, and thank you for joining us. Let's kick this off then with history. What was the SMG 08 based on from the actual real world? Well, much like my previous video on the Hell Eagle, this was an experimental weapon, something that many complained about featuring so prominently in Battlefield 1, because these guns were basically absolutely everywhere in the game, whereas in actual World War I, they saw either no or very little actual combat action. For me, this was no big deal as I just enjoy getting new guns, but I can see why this would have been an issue for those who wanted a more authentic experience. Anyway, it is also sometimes referred to as the Maxim SMG. It was indeed a submachine gun, at least by today's definition, and it was probably, but not definitely, utilized by the Germans. As I'm sure you can tell already, there isn't a huge amount of info about this gun out there. What we do know though is that it used a 9mm pistol round, had an 80 round feed box, and was probably developed in 1918, as the in-game name also suggests, with it being the SMG 0818. Once again, a shout out to the fantastic Critical Chris, who I believe I initially sourced a lot of this info from way back in the BF1 days. And that's enough for a history lesson. Let's now hit those basics. And I think the best use of this section today is to lay out how DICE completely transformed this gun from being one thing into basically the total opposite. Because when the SMG 08 was first added to Battlefield 1, it was a slow firing SMG. It had a rate of fire of 450 rounds per minute, which is absolutely on the slow side. It actually functioned like a support class weapon in a lot of ways. This was designed to be a more ponderous, cautious usage gun for the assault class, a class already bursting with close range run and gun options. So the SMG 08 provided a new kind of playstyle, lacking raw killing potential, requiring 5 to 8 bullets to kill with that slow rate of fire, but being very easy to handle, with I think the lowest recoil in the class at the time. But then more issues were lumped on top of all this, with slow muzzle velocity of 380 meters per second, and a slow reload when you actually needed to do so, especially when reloading without emptying the magazine. Now clearly a lot of that just doesn't line up with what you've been watching, and that's because these stats made for a gun that was different and could be fun and indeed effective for the right player, but was near totally overlooked by many. It simply didn't appeal to the mass player base at all, so DICE changed it, and it became what you've been watching, a 770 round per minute powerhouse which retained that massive ammo capacity, and thus a despised legend was born, ripping players up left, right and center with next to no difficulty involved. So let's move on to usage. How much action did the SMG 08 see in BF1? Well, on the day of producing this video in mid-2020, BattlefieldTracker.com has the SMG 08 factory as the most used SMG for the day, standing at 29.8% of all SMG usage, basically trading the top spot on random days with the Hell Eagle factory. But the SMG 08 optical is nowhere near, with just 1.2%. And then we have my anecdotal evidence. The general feeling I can gather about the SMG 08 from back when BF1 was the current game is that it became quite widely used, especially on smaller scale maps and modes. It wasn't quite like the Hell Eagle dominance at one point, which was about 50% usage rate, but the SMG 08 definitely featured to a large degree. It did require challenge completion to unlock it though, which may have had a bit of an impact, although quite minor, as they were very simple for the factory variant, although a little more tricky for the optical, as some players wouldn't have been keen on getting 5 anti-tank mine kills on tanks if they weren't used to using them. And all in all, the factory factory variant of the SMG08 seems to have been a lot more popular than the optical variant from the very beginning. I'm featuring footage of both today, with the optical footage to come later in the video. But now let's cover the basic strengths of the SMG08. Well, it's simple really. It's a spray and pray dream. Fast rate of fire with a large magazine. Pretty much the true precursor to the Type 2A in Battlefield 1. I did mention that in my Hellregal video previously, but the SMG08 is a much better comparison. 770 RPM was really quite fast for Battlefield 1, and needing now only 4 to 7 bullets to kill, and 81 rounds per reload was gigantic for an SMG. It just about stripped away any thinking if all you wanted to do was run around and hold down the trigger. You could totally use it that way, and the vast majority of players that got anywhere near you could simply mow down. Now, the factory variant was better for utilizing a superior first shot multiplier, among other things, and the optical came with a lens sight and has better aimed accuracy. But most players for this kind of weapon will favor the factory's all-round abilities, especially as you can simply equip an AA sight if you do want something other than the iron sights, although I neglected to get footage of that for this video. So what about the weaknesses? Well, this is very much a close range weapon in a game with a lot of large scale maps and modes. It simply can't compete with longer range options in a vast array of circumstances, meaning an SMG08 user does have to know where the gun excels in order to use it well consistently, whereas a casual or average player, let's say, will run around with it randomly and have a chance of dominating with it up close, and have zero chance of survival when challenging from even closest mid-range. To some this won't matter, but it is a big reason why this gun likely isn't a 100% overpowered option as many deem it to be, and yes, that is why I put it in quotation marks in the title, because the titles are all about the reputation it has, not what I think of it. It is great at what it does in a basic sense, but it falls behind in more specialized circumstances. It can be out hip-fired from range. It isn't particularly great in aimed fire, and it's just kinda limited. A confusing mix of very strong and yet lacking. And so, what are some examples of counters for this gun that is so often deemed as overpowered? Well, for anywhere outside close range, it's absolutely leveled by medic rifles, LMGs, bolt actions, and the like. It's simply not able to compete. There's no point even discussing long range, because although it can be tap-fired for some surprising kills now and again, its actual lethality by comparison at that range is pitiful. So almost anything beats it there. For close range though, where it's a top contender, it can be hip-fired down as I alluded to before. An MP18 trench, an Automatico trench, etc. can take the SMG08 apart in a 1v1 if used well. Of course, the SMG08 also gets a rude awakening from a shotgun at times, so to make it simple, for a brain-dead run-around experience, the SMG08 is the king. Against the average player, it'll fare very well where it's supposed to be used, but against a capable player, or if the user steps a little outside where they should be, it gets wrecked. So now let's break down the playstyle of the SMG08, whether it be the optimal or simply commonly found. So as heavily alluded to so far, for your casual, average or less able player, this is a go-to option. It heavily shines in positions where such players often take engagements and can do okay, whilst being outmatched outside of it, where it likely won't matter too much what that kind of user is choosing to run with. On a mode like Team Deathmatch or in a high traffic area with close range confinement, you can rest assured running around with this, knowing that you'll win more fights than you'll lose against players of similar ability, simply because the SMG08 is so strong and user-friendly there. This then obviously also applies to a more able player, just to a larger and less limited degree. The SMG08 is an absolute pub-stomping machine that only really performs well in one area. However, special mention for its ability to take on multiple enemies without reloading, and the potential for crazy large flanks for the same reason. Add in that tap firing can extend its range for those who are capable, with the factory variant being the better option for this due to that superior first shot multiplier. So it does take skill to use the SMG08 in a truly versatile manner, but at that point you'll likely be better off using a different gun anyway. Stick to what it's good at and simply mitigate its weaknesses when forced to. And this brings us to the meta. A lot of this can actually directly flow from our previous section, and it sounds very similar to what I said about the Hellregal in my previous Remember video, which falls right into that common trope of the average player going for whatever is easiest to use. However, effectiveness isn't isn't the same as ease of use. For your average to low skill player, the SMG08 is about as big a buff to them as you can get. It is perfect for them, providing them with every strength they could want, whilst only suffering weaknesses that player likely won't be able to account for on most other weapons anyway. It is a top meta choice for them. For your above average player, it's still a very strong option, falling somewhere around the top end of weapons, but with some heavy limitations, being extremely good at what it does, but having too many deficiencies that can be exposed by top end players, meaning that it's by no means bad at all. It's an excellent weapon in fact. It's just not the absolute total god gun that many see it as. Although it likely does skew too far up the scale of ease of use to effectiveness balance, it is honestly too strong, just not enough to be considered absolutely broken in a game like BF1 with so many factors other than close range engagements. And so what of its legacy? Well, it went down as the mistake that many assumed wouldn't be made again. A high rate of fire, easy to use, massive magazine weapon. But then we got the Type 2A, which had to be nerfed. All of that stuff is simply too appealing to the average player, which causes weapon diversity usage problems. And so now the SMG08 will forever be seen by many as simply bad balancing, as an experience wrecker, but also a lot of fun for many to use. Whether all of that is fair or not is up for debate, but that's absolutely the legacy it leaves behind. And so let's hit the conclusion. The SMG08 was transformed into something too good. It's a noob's dream gun, as well as being just incredibly easy to use at its set range for basically all players. Its main crime was invalidating some other weapon options for the vast majority of the player base, which is never a good thing. But it's pretty much objectively not a total game wrecker. It's not 100% overpowered, as many deem it to be. Yes, I think it was ridiculously insane. It just got too many strengths, but for a lot of situations, it's not an optimal choice. A mix we don't often see, yet here we are. Slight tweaks would have fixed this. It will continue to frustrate many, but a good player can counter it. A gun far too strong for the vast majority of players, but one that is still not an optimal choice for the top end of players. And that is, do you remember the SMG08 18? Be sure to let me know what you think of the gun in the comments below, good, bad, or otherwise, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leaving a like is huge, and subscribing if you haven't done so before is massively appreciated, especially while I chase 50k subscribers. And all the links to my social media, including Patreon, can be found in the description and my pinned comment, where if you do support me on Patreon, you'll join the board of awesome you're seeing right here with all the epic people that already do so. They're all absolute heroes, and I love them all deeply and of course often. So yep, all the links to that in the description and my pinned comment, and with all that said, I am GetGoodGuy, and I'll see you next time, laters. Which, if true, means that DICE had to guess what some aspects of the gun even look like, but we do know that it had a water-cooled barrel to aid in keeping the temperature of the weapon down to try to avoid overheating.